finding new ways to further strengthen economic ties and integrate trade and investment in Southeast Asia. That topped the agenda of the ASEAN Economic Ministers meeting in the Philippine capital, Manila. It is expected that by 2050, ASEAN's economy will grow to over $9.2 trillion, making it the fourth largest economic bloc in the world. Despite rising protectionism and uncertainties in several trade policies, both China and ASEAN stress the need to reaffirm the importance of regional and global economic integration. Data showed China maintained its position as ASEAN's largest trading partner since 2009 and continued to its fourth largest source of foreign direct investment. Bilateral commodity trade reached over $300 billion in 2016, accounting for 16.5% of ASEAN's total trade value. And foreign direct investment from China hit over $9 billion in 2016, making up 9.5% of ASEAN's total. ASEAN ministers also welcomed China's proposal to synergize the Belt and Road Initiative with the bloc's development strategy to further enhance bilateral ties.
China's
Belt and Road Initiative aims to create trade, financial, and cultural networks stretching from East Asia to Europe and beyond, focusing on key areas of industrial development, financial integration and reform, and infrastructure construction.
ASEAN countries hope the initiative could help create better trade and capital flows, as well as boost infrastructure connectivity for its 625 million people.
So what's the word on the China-ASEAN Expo leading up to the Maritime Silk Road? Let's turn to our panelists. Once again, we are joined by Zhao Tong, associate in the Carnegie's nuclear program with the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy, and also joining us in Beijing studio, Rick Dunham, co-director of the Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University, a very well-established American journalist, been working in Washington for decades. Let me ask both of you about this question. You know, China-ASEAN, this story has been there for quite some time, but with the Belt and Road Initiative, particularly the Maritime Silk Road, does it bring much possibility to this relationship, Mr. Zhao?
I do think so, because the 21st century is a globalized century. It's also a maritime century, so it's very important to increase connectivity, increase mutual understanding between countries, and the Silk Road Initiative will be very important for achieving this goal.
Many, of course, China included, ASEAN countries too, have beautiful coastlines, and the cooperation about the sea, related to the sea, is certainly one of the key components of the economy.
It's true, and it goes two ways. One is delivery of commerce by ship. Another is tourism. The potential of Chinese tourists on the beaches around Southeast Asia. So again, that one goes both ways. But the seas are. I mean, it was the original maritime Silk Road for a reason.
That's right. And earlier there was the BRICS summit, and one of the things people talk about is how to get to know one another better, not through a third source. I'm not saying the American press. I'm just saying not through a third source, but rather through direct communications. China-ASEAN, the same way. Mr. Zhao, there are different kinds of development stages and also history backgrounds to these ASEAN countries. Some come out of the colonial days, others have been struggling on their own for decades. How do you think this group, the unity itself, and the possibility of working with China on a newer level?
Right, as you pointed out, there was long historical roots of the trading relationship between ASEAN countries, well, ASEAN region and China, dating back all the way to the Han Dynasty in China. And that process was interrupted in recent centuries by the colonization process and independence of new national states, etc. But that process, I think, was renewed recently. And as you also mentioned, I think China and ASEAN countries are now at slightly different stages of country building and industrialization. China is at advanced stage of industrialization, and therefore has very good technologies and experience that can be shared with ASEAN countries. And also China's advanced electronic products, its agricultural technology, its technology for renewable energy are very needed in ASEAN countries. And in return, the fruits, the food products, the daily consuming stuffs are very much favored by Chinese consumers. Right. So the economic relationship between ASEAN and China are really mutually complementary. So I think that's very important.
But at the same time, the TPP, of course, has been a story of the past, even though there have been efforts to revive it from time to time. Yet the Maritime Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, has been advocated quite widely in the region. Do you think there could be spaces for the ASEAN countries to come in, not just as a receiver of fund coming from China, but rather also to have their own input as to how to make the idea work on a bigger basis to everybody's advantage? Mr. Zhao, very briefly before I move to Mr. Dunham.
Well, I think ASEAN countries possess a very important geological position. Right? It's the first leg of China's Maritime Silk Road, and China's own trade depends very much on the maritime lanes of shipping in the South China Sea.
That's right.
So I think that's why ASEAN has become such an important region for China's Maritime Silk Road initiative. And ASEAN actually becomes a regional hub for the initiative. So I do think there is a lot of potential. And also ASEAN helps connect China with other countries along the road, along the Silk Road.
Yes.
And at this ASEAN-China Expo, there were expeditions areas for other countries like Kazakhstan, Pakistan. So ASEAN actually becomes a bridge between China and other countries.
Very interesting going on there. Mr. Dunham.
Well, I see, in addition to the issue of China and ASEAN, you have a growth in regional trading blocs. You have globalization on the retreat overall. And then you also have Donald Trump in the United States and the America First trade policy. So there are opportunities for regional trade blocs in Asia and the Pacific to grow. And you had Donald Trump day one pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, effectively destroying the years of negotiations. So the question is whether China emerges as the dominant force, or what is the role of China, Japan, and Korea in dealing with ASEAN.
That's very true. The ASEAN +1, +2, +3 has been the mechanism for quite some years. So the ASEAN countries also seem to, Mr. Zhao, try to keep a balance about its positions vis-a-vis these three countries as well. And of course, these countries have different kinds of relationship with their ally, the United States. What do you make of the capability of balance of ASEAN countries over the years so far, Mr. Zhao?
I think, of course, on security issues, ASEAN countries want to balance between big powers. That's the best way to defend their own interests. But I think economic issues are of a different nature. It's always mutually beneficial. U.S. closed down the TPP initiative, but instead China offered the regional comprehensive partnership. And that has received very good feedback from regional countries. The negotiations on that are expected to conclude by the end of this year. And the great rate of growth increase between ASEAN and China is a testimony of the mutually beneficial economic relationship. The rate of growth between ASEAN and China has been much greater than China's overall trade growth rate. And after the upgrade of the ASEAN-China free trade area in 2015, the ASEAN-China trade actually increased much faster.
That's right.
So I think that all demonstrates that we can build a mutually beneficial economic relationship.
So when it comes to trade, I mean, there seems to be a very natural link there between China and ASEAN. But you know, Mr. Dunham, it's no secret that some countries in the region have been talking about, when it comes to security guarantee, let's just work with the United States. When it comes to trade and economic issues, of course we go to China. It has a lot of cash and ready to invest in the region. What do you make of these seem to have, in a way, very shared responsibilities? Will they really serve the interests of the ASEAN countries eventually?
I think eventually you can't just have one big nation be your security blanket and the other one be your economic lifeline. I think you have to integrate, or you have to choose. And I mean, I think the biggest challenge for China with the ASEAN countries is that there are some political disagreements, particularly territorial disagreements, and those are the things that China has to manage, because if you have good relationships, good diplomatic relationships, it will help open the door for the economic, and especially if the United States is in retreat from the global marketplace, there is such an opportunity right now, but China has to pivot a little bit to make sure that it is welcomed with open arms in those countries.
We see some different development stages of the relationship between China and some of those ASEAN countries when you say there could be some territorial disputes. At the very beginning, there seemed to be some tensions going on there. And then it seems parties calm down, seeming to understand that there's no other way but to be able to settle it through discussions and diplomatic ways. And they're then followed up with Belt and Road initiatives, the summit of it, for example, being held earlier in China. And now you see even the countries like the Philippines have been trying to make an extra effort together with China to try to handle the issue within a framework which both sides agree. And on a bigger scale, that is happening as well between China and ASEAN countries. You also see China's positions trying to compromise what the others have been having in their minds. So have we found relatively a matured path of handling the day-to-day issues and moving forward to really establishing some kinds of strategic trust, at least on territorial issues, in order to move forward? Mr. Zhao.
I think we're already moving there.
Yes.
There is indeed a serious security disagreement in the region, especially over the South China Sea, that has a deep historical root. However, I think, as Rick just mentioned, I think the economic mutual dependence really helps stabilize the political relationship. So when there are security disagreements, I think the countries will have a harder time to fight each other. They will have more interests in pursue a mutually acceptable agreement to settle the disputes. And also the Maritime Security Road initiative is not only about economic development. No. It also has important component, that is people-to-people exchange. And increasingly, my personal experience is my colleagues are increasingly going to ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Singapore for vacations. They visit local communities, and also I have increasingly foreign colleagues coming from these countries.
Right.
So I think this people-to-people exchange will really help increase better mutual understanding, and that will, in the long run, help resolve the historical dispute.
And you see this year's coming APEC summit is also likely to be held in the ASEAN country, one of those, Vietnam. So certainly the state leaders are also going to get there and try to work out some of the issues related to it. Mr. Dunham, what about the future? Are we on the right path?
I think we are on the right path. I echo the thoughts about people-to-people. My program at Tsinghua, the Global Business Journalism Program, has had students from Vietnam and Malaysia. Thailand.
Younger generation from all of these countries.
And these are people who are looking toward the future. I mean, they are interested in both business and journalism, and so I think that there is an opening there, and for cooperation between the countries where China has economic assets that can help the other countries develop. I mean, where they benefit, where it's not just economic colonialism.
Very interesting. There are a lot of things going on when it comes to people-to-people exchanges. Some say it's got to be very slow to turn the nature of the relationship, but you know what? You have to do it. And then things will change for the better, we hope. Thank you so much, Rick Dunham and Zhao Tong. Thank you. Really appreciate it.